Hello and welcome to the Biological Anthropology lecture series. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Tadurin. Here we explore what it means to be human, biologically, evolutionarily, and behaviorally. Let's begin our journey into the science of humanity. Welcome to Module 8, Australopithecines. In this module, we examine the first stable and unambiguous hominin adaptive grade, exploring how Australopithecines resolved earlier uncertainties and laid the biological foundations for later human evolution. In this section, we explore the diversity of Australopithecines, showing that they were not a single linear form, but a successful and adaptable group occupying varied ecological niches across time and space. Let's revisit what we mean by gracile when we talk about Australopithecines. The term doesn't mean weak or insignificant. Instead, it refers to a general pattern of lighter skeletal build and less extreme chewing adaptations compared to the so-called robust forms. Gracile Australopithecines represent some of the earliest and most widespread members of the genus, and they give us a clear picture of how a generalized hominin body plan functioned across diverse environments. Let's look at the best-known examples. Species like Australopithecus, anamensis, and Australopithecus afarensis show us a combination of consistent bipedalism and retained arboreal abilities. You might remember afarensis through fossils like Lucy or the Laetoli footprints. These finds are powerful because they show bipedalism in action, not just inferred from bones. The footprints in particular reveal a heel-to-toe walking pattern that looks strikingly familiar, even though the walkers themselves were clearly not modern humans. Now think about body proportions. Gracile Australopithecines tend to have relatively long arms compared to their legs, which suggests that climbing still played a role in their daily lives. At the same time, the pelvis, femur, and knee are clearly organized for upright walking. This tells us something important about their lifestyle. Rather than abandoning the trees entirely, Gracile Australopithecines seem to have balanced terrestrial bipedalism with continued use of arboreal resources. It's a flexible strategy, well suited to mosaic environments where food and shelter are spread across different ecological zones. Let's turn to dentition for a moment. Gracile Australopithecines show reduced canines and non-honing chewing, but without the extreme jaw and tooth enlargement seen later in robust forms. You might wonder why that matters. This dental pattern suggests a broadly flexible diet, one that didn't rely heavily on a single mechanically demanding food source. Instead, these hominins could exploit a range of plant and possibly animal foods, adjusting as conditions changed. Gracile Australopithecines persist for a long time and across wide geographic areas. That persistence tells us they were successful. They weren't transitional in the sense of being short-lived or poorly adapted. Instead, they represent a stable, adaptable form that worked well under varying environmental pressures. So, when we study Gracile Australopithecines, we're not just filling in a gap between earlier hominins and later humans. We're seeing a blueprint for hominin success, a body plan that combines efficient bipedalism, dietary flexibility, and ecological versatility. Keep that in mind as we move forward, because it helps explain why later evolutionary pathways, including the emergence of Homo, build upon this Gracile Australopithecine foundation rather than replacing it outright. Let's revisit an idea that often slips into the background when we talk about early human evolution, the assumption that there was one Australopithecine species neatly replacing another through time. The fossil record doesn't support that picture. Instead, what we see is diversity unfolding across regions and overlapping in time. Australopithecine evolution is not a single straight path, but a branching pattern shaped by geography, ecology, and local adaptation. Let's look at geography first. Australopithecine fossils come primarily from East and Southern Africa, and those regions tell slightly different stories. In East Africa, species appear early and show a wide range of anatomical variation within a relatively short time span. You might recognize this region as the setting for some of the most famous discoveries, but what matters here is not fame, it's coexistence. Multiple Australopithecine forms appear to have lived in the same general areas, sometimes at the same time. That alone challenges the idea of a simple ancestor-descendant sequence. Now consider southern Africa. Fossils from this region often come from cave sites and represent populations living in somewhat different ecological contexts. The Australopithecines found there show their own patterns of variation in body size, cranial shape, and dentition. Think about what that implies. If Australopithecines were spreading across different landscapes, then natural selection would have favored slightly different solutions to the same basic challenges: how to walk upright, how to process food, and how to survive in changing environments. Temporal overlap adds another layer. Rather than one species disappearing before another appears, the fossil record suggests that several Australopithecine species existed simultaneously. You might wonder why that matters. It matters because it tells us evolution wasn't waiting for one form to fail before another succeeded. Instead, different Australopithecines explored different adaptive strategies at the same time, each shaped by local conditions. When species overlap in time and space, it becomes risky to draw straight lines of descent. Some Australopithecines may be closely related to later Homo, while others represent side branches that eventually went extinct. Diversity doesn't mean disorder. It means opportunity. A varied population increases the chances that some forms will be well suited to future environmental changes. So when we talk about regional and temporal diversity among Australopithecines, we're really talking about evolutionary resilience. This group was not a single experiment, but a cluster of related experiments running in parallel. Understanding that diversity helps us move away from oversimplified evolutionary narratives and toward a more realistic view, one where multiple hominin forms shared the landscape, adapted in different ways, and collectively shaped the evolutionary pathways that followed. Let's revisit what we mean by ecological flexibility, because it's easy to underestimate how important this concept is in evolution. Ecological flexibility isn't about being perfectly adapted to one environment. It's about being able to cope with variation, changes in climate, food availability, and landscape without falling apart. The long evolutionary success of Australopithecines makes little sense unless we recognize how flexible they were in the environments they occupied. Let's look at the settings Australopithecines lived in. For a long time, human evolution was imagined as a story that unfolded mainly on open savannas. But the fossil and environmental evidence tells a different story. Australopithecines lived in a range of habitats, including woodlands, forest edges, and mixed mosaic environments. These were landscapes where trees, open ground, and seasonal variation existed side by side. You might wonder why that matters. It matters because such environments reward versatility rather than extreme specialization. Think about locomotion first. Australopithecines were committed bipeds, but they retained some arboreal capabilities. This combination allowed them to move efficiently on the ground while still using trees for food, shelter, or safety. In a patchy environment, that's a major advantage. Rather than being locked into a single mode of movement, Australopithecines could exploit resources across vertical and horizontal space. Now let's turn to diet. Dental evidence shows that Australopithecines were not dependent on one narrow food source. Their thick enamel and broad chewing surfaces suggest the ability to process foods that were tough, fibrous, or abrasive, especially during times when preferred foods were scarce. You might wonder if that means they ate the same things all the time. Probably not. Instead, their dentition points to dietary breadth, the ability to switch between foods as conditions changed. That flexibility would have been critical in environments shaped by seasonal rainfall and fluctuating plant resources. Ecological flexibility helps explain why Australopithecines persisted for well over 1 million years. Species that are too specialized often thrive briefly and then disappear when conditions shift. Australopithecines, by contrast, were adaptable enough to weather environmental change without requiring dramatic anatomical transformation. Let's also consider energy use. Bipedal locomotion is more efficient over long distances than quadrupedal walking in apes. Combined with dietary flexibility, this efficiency would have allowed Australopithecines to range widely in search of food without excessive energetic cost. That ability matters in landscapes where resources are unevenly distributed. So when we talk about ecological flexibility in Australopithecines, we're really talking about resilience. They were not perfectly adapted to one niche, they were good enough at many things. That balance between specialization and versatility is a recurring theme in human evolution. As we move forward, keep this in mind. The evolutionary pathways that lead toward Homo don't begin with extreme innovation, but with a body plan and lifestyle capable of adapting to a changing world. First, let's revisit what we've uncovered in this section. We started by challenging the idea that Australopithecines represent a single, uniform stage in human evolution. Instead, we saw a group marked by variation, across regions, across time, and across ecological settings. Now, this part is important. That diversity is not noise in the fossil record. It's evidence of evolutionary success. Think about what it means for multiple Australopithecine species to exist at the same time, sometimes even in the same regions. You might wonder whether that makes the evolutionary story more confusing. In reality, it makes it more realistic. Evolution doesn't work by waiting for one form to disappear before another appears. It works by producing variation and letting different forms respond to different challenges. Australopithecines did exactly that. Let's look at how this diversity connects to ecology. Differences in body size, chewing anatomy, and habitat use reflect flexible responses to changing environments. Some Australopithecines leaned toward generalized diets and broad ecological tolerance, while others explored more specialized strategies. Rather than seeing these differences as evolutionary dead ends, we should see them as parallel experiments unfolding under similar constraints. Now step back and consider the bigger picture. This diversity helps explain why Australopithecines persisted for so long. A varied group is more resilient than a uniform one. When environments shift, some forms struggle, but others are already suited to the new conditions. That resilience creates evolutionary opportunity. As we close this section, keep one idea in mind. Australopithecine diversity is not a detour on the road to human evolution. It's the foundation that made later pathways possible. Understanding that diversity prepares us to ask the next question, not just how Australopithecines lived, but why only some evolutionary pathways continued forward. Thank you for joining this lecture. I'm Dr. Richard Jonathan O. Taduran. I hope this session deepened your understanding of biological anthropology. Keep exploring what it means to be human. See you soon.